Security scan. Please stand by. Scanning. Do not move. Security scan successful. You now have full access to all files. Welcome to Conspiracies, Inc. With your host, Bryan Datillo. Do you believe?
I am Bryan Datillo. This is Conspiracies, Inc. Thank you for joining us for our very first season as we tackle the alien controversy, the alien cover-up, the alien conspiracy. Our very first season. Thank you for joining us. And my guest today, I am starstruck. I am starstruck over this guest today. I'm beside myself. We have David Hatcher Childress here, DHC, I like to call him, and he is an amazing personality from Ancient Aliens, that show I've watched, as you guys know, for so long, and we just had Nick Pope on, so you're joining the. I'm getting into the whole cast of Ancient Aliens right now, so it's a huge honor to have you, David Hatcher Childress. Thank you for joining us today on Conspiracies, Inc.
Hi, Bryan. Yep, good to be on your show.
Sweet. Okay, now I know a little about you. I know you've written like over 20 books, and I've seen you on Ancient Aliens. Like every single time you're on there, I'm right there going, here he is. This is my guy. All right, but I know in around the 1980s that you did the Ancient Mysteries of South America. You did that book. Is that correct?
Right. Starting in the 80s, I started writing these Lost Cities books.
Okay.
And that was my second book, my second Lost Cities book, Lost Cities of and Ancient Mysteries of South America.
Okay.
So that's the one you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I did a bunch of other Lost Cities books, one on Lost Cities of China, Central Asia, and India, another one called Lost Cities of Ancient Lemuria and the Pacific.
Uh-huh.
It's all about Pacific Islands and stuff like that. I did another one, Lost Cities, Ancient Mysteries of Africa and Arabia.
Oh, wow.
And then the last one, sort of in that series, was Lost Cities of North and Central America.
Oh, nice.
And then later, about 20 years ago, I did a book called Lost Cities and Ancient Mysteries of the Southwest.
Oh, okay.
So that's like all about the American Southwest. And
There's a lot of lost cities.
Yeah, there are a lot of lost cities, and yeah, I've written over 20 books. One of the books I'm really it's a popular book is this one, Technology of the Gods.
Okay.
Yeah, and we sold a lot of this book. This is books about ancient technology and ancient electricity, even atomic warfare and stuff in the past.
And that's what that's what the picture is right there. Is supposedly that's the ancient light bulb right there for the Egyptians, correct?
Yeah, right. In Dara, yeah, these Egyptian light bulbs and things. And yeah, I mean, they had electricity, they had flight, they had all kinds of other, technology that we don't really give them credit for. This is another book that I wrote fairly recently called Vimana Aircraft.
Okay, we're gonna get into that.
Flying machines of the ancients, yeah. And so this book is about ancient Indian texts, Sanskrit texts, and stuff like that, and more.
Sure.
That talk about these Vimanas, these ancient aircraft, them flying, where they went, what kind of type of aircraft they were. And in this book too, I talk about Mercury as being allegedly part of the propulsion and stuff like that of the Vimana craft.
Well, let's get into that. I was going to save that, but let's get into it now because you brought it up. Now, is it true that when Mercury is kind of capsulized or in a controlled environment, when it's spun to a certain degree that it creates anti-gravity, or is it have to do with the electromagnetic field setup around the actual ball of Mercury that's spinning? And then I was going to get into the Tesla coils and get into Tesla stuff. But now that we're on the Vimanas, what is the main technology they use? Because I know their ships were huge.
Well, apparently there were like 5 different types of Vimanas. One type was a cigar-shaped kind of mothercraft, apparently. Others were flying discs. Others were like airplanes with wings and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
some of the texts, and there's a number of them, and I quote them and stuff in the book. They talk about Mercury as being part of the propulsion, and what it appears to be. See, Mercury is interesting. Mercury is an element. It's a liquid. It's also a metal. It's a conductor. Mercury has very special qualities that are unique to only it. Mercury, too, is the messenger god of the Greeks. Yep. He flew through the air. The caduceus is the symbol of the god Mercury. So the caduceus itself seems to be, a diagram of like a vortex type engine or device or something. What apparently it does, and I do try to describe the technology in the book, and in some of my other anti-gravity books and things like that, I also get into this. What apparently they did with Mercury was, Mercury, first of all, is poisonous, and mercury gas or vapor is deadly and stuff like that. So probably within using Mercury, you're going to use it in a closed system. Right. And it was apparently what they call a Mercury vortex engine is a spinning globe one way to maybe imagine as a glass sphere or something like that. And Mercury is inside it, and that Mercury begins spinning, and probably as a toroid. That's the best idea, right. Which is like a donut type or smoke ring type thing. But once you electrify that, and you have essentially what they call a Mercury gyro. So you think of a gyro moving, and gyros are anti-gravity for starters. I mean, they defy gravity. Gyros are very special things, and they use them in aircraft and whatnot. So if you have a Mercury gyro, then you have the Mercury spinning around like a gyro, but then you electrify it and you add electricity to it. This turns the Mercury into a plasma, an electrified gas. Got it. But it's still spinning either as a tornado kind of thing or as a toroid, and it apparently gives an anti-gravity lift, and these things will fly. That's the idea behind it. And it's interesting too, just to give you some interest, some perspective on Mercury. Yeah, not only throughout ancient history was Mercury, used and talked about as a god. He flew through the air and all that. But for instance, the main town that's at Area 51 in Nevada is called Mercury, Nevada. That's the town. Okay, and that you can't go there, but if you drive west out of Las Vegas, right, just south of Area 51, you will see a highway sign, and it will say Mercury, and there's an exit, and you can't go there because Mercury is on the base on that military range of Area 51. But that's what it's called, Mercury, Nevada. Now, why would that be?
Donald Schmidt didn't tell me that.
Yeah,
he left that out.
So it's interesting there too. An interesting conspiracy thing that goes back to the JFK assassination was that there was a Canadian pilot, and he had been at a airport in Manitoba, and he had heard these two guys talking, and one of them was apparently David Ferry, the famous guy who was involved with Oswald in New Orleans and stuff like that. And David Ferry was a pilot, and he's features in these JFK movies and things like that. Well, what this Canadian pilot heard them talking about was the Kennedy assassination and killing Kennedy. And David Ferry at one point said to this other guy, he said, "Don't worry about the money. We'll get it from Mercury."
Wow.
And this Canadian pilot, he made a report to the, Canadian police and then ultimately to the FBI, and he told them what he had heard and everything. but people had trouble making sense of that.
From the
like
planet Mercury?
but we're going to get the money from Mercury. What did that mean?
From the planet
Well, apparently
itself?
he was talking about Mercury, Nevada, and Area 51.
Oh, okay.
So that's the thing, was that, David Ferry was talking about Mercury. This would have been about 1960. So, that's the interesting thing there too, is that Roswell was really the Area 51 of the 40s.
Right.
And then, that was where all the secret stuff was going on, was right around Roswell. But this ultimately got moved to Nevada in the end, mainly in the 60s.
Well, if we go back, if we go back a little, I know it's a huge part of ancient alien lore, the anti-gravity, but it's also a part of the Nazi lore, early 20s, 30s. It's also before that with Tesla, late 1800s with him and the Tesla coils. Now, is the Mercury the same type of anti-gravity as the electromagnetic Tesla coils?
Well, that would be different. Yeah, I think that Tesla did know about Mercury, and there's different types of anti-gravity, I think,
right.
And Tesla's anti-gravity was more of a, electric charge or something like that.
Uh-huh.
That's what Einstein had said, that you have a unified field. He postulated the unified field, and the unified field is an energy field from which magnetism and gravity and electricity, or the weak field, all these things manifest, he thought, from the unified field. And then that's what Tesla would use too. Tesla did use Mercury, and it's interesting that one of his lost patents, and it was published recently in a Princeton University book about Tesla. Mm-hmm. And what it was Tesla's ray gun, or death ray. Mm-hmm. And what this death ray was also used Mercury, and it was essentially your ray gun of the 30s, and essentially the ray gun of Star Wars.
Right.
And what it did was you had a chamber of mercury, and this gun would then fire what was like a supercharged mercury pellet. So you'd have, like, the mercury would go into the chamber, and it would be superheated and then charged and then fired from the gun. And so what would hit you would be this super hot molten mercury that was just charged and super hot, and it would just go right through you. And that is essentially what we're looking at with these Star Wars ray guns and things. And it would look much like that. And like in Star Wars, you see this kind of light pellet, that's bright and lit, firing out of the gun and hitting people and stuff like that. And that was really this Tesla Mercury ray gun thing. And that was unknown until just maybe 10 years ago or so. There's so much stuff going on with Tesla. Tesla back in the 30s, the magazines at the time, Electrical Experimenter and things like that, they would interview Tesla in New York City, and he happily gave them all kinds of ideas and his latest inventions. And he talked about these anti-gravity ships drawing power from his towers. Mm-hmm. And they were all electric. They had no wings or anything. They looked like kind of Zeppelins, but they didn't have gas in them. They was completely electric. That's the other thing about Tesla too. Tesla died during World War II. He died in 1943 during the middle of the war, really. And that's a little bit mysterious right there. What happened to Tesla? Tesla would go out at after midnight, and he would feed these pigeons in New York City. And one night, around 1939 or so, he was doing that. He would walk to St. Mark's Church or something down the street in New York City, and he was hit by a taxi cab, which didn't stop. So it was like a hit and run, and Tesla was kind of badly hurt, but he wouldn't go to a doctor. He had a lifelong thing of not going to see doctors and things like that. So he had maybe broken some ribs and things like that. And that, started his health decline, we would say. But when Tesla finally died, I mean, the FBI went in there and they took all his files and things like that. And one of the people, too, who was used by the FBI to examine Tesla's papers was Donald Trump's uncle.
Wow.
Yeah, and he went in there and he was one of the ones who looked at all of Tesla's papers and stuff. And then he wrote a paper saying that, Tesla's stuff wasn't really all that exciting and that there wasn't really anything like super interesting in Tesla's papers that they got.
Right.
But I think that, that apparently is quite wrong. And I mean, they were always looking at Tesla's things. And that also, goes to the oil industry and the oil conspiracy and rockets. If Tesla had survived World War II, and if he had been involved in the space program, he would, we wouldn't be shooting rockets at the moon. Our, spaceships and stuff would be electric, and which is what you have with UFOs.
Right.
That's, when you're looking at a flying saucer or a flying triangle or one of these motherships or whatever, they're not jets. They're not rockets. They're anti-gravity. They're electric. And they're flying around. They have lights around them. They can hover. They often have a buzzing sound or even like a crackling of electricity around them. They often have a aura, like a glow.
Sure.
That's part of the craft. So this is, and now extraterrestrials too. If extraterrestrials are coming to our solar system, on our planet, they're not coming here in rockets. They're not coming, they're coming here in very advanced electric type craft. I mean, and these craft can, and I think Star Wars is a pretty good, analogy of what's going on, in the sense that these craft can jump through hyperspace. They're in a way, they're like a time travel device as well.
Mm-hmm.
You're to go from one solar system to another. You do it instantly, really, in no time at all. There's not this Star Trek, warp speed thing. Like, okay, we're going 7 times faster than the speed of light, and we'll get there in a couple hours or something. But in Star Wars, you jump through hyperspace and you're instantly, where you want to be in another solar system or another galaxy or wherever you're going.
So we're talking not only a propulsion, but we're talking about something that can jump dimensions.
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, and you're folding time in front of you. You're jumping through hyperspace. I always thought it was there's so many great scenes in the Star Wars movies. We all, love watching those, where I think he's on the Millennium Falcon and he's trying to, make the jump to hyperspace, and the computer's making all of the, calculations and all that. And then suddenly it all powers down and goes dead. Yeah, it is like pounding, the dashboard. Oh, damn it, we can't jump to hyperspace right now because the computer,
right,
can't calculate it.
Yeah.
So there's just so much good there. I mean, George Lucas is a genius, and I love Star Trek stuff and all of the sci-fi things. But I think now that's something too to talk about. My latest book is this book Andromeda, The Secret Files, and that's part of my trilogy that I began about 2 years ago. The first book in that series was Antarctica and the Secret Space Program.
There we go.
Yeah. So in this one, I dove into the whole Antarctica stuff and secret bases in Antarctica and some of the claims and whatnot. And of course,
let's talk about that. Let's talk about the Antarctica stuff, because I learned a new word this week when I was doing my research: flugel rods. When I heard flugel rods were the name of the UFOs, supposedly when Richard Byrd went down to Antarctica, he ran into an alien race, and these ships were called flugel rods. So then I'm doing more research, and I see there's actually a BMW flugel rod too. So I'm going crazy. I want the BMW flugel rod too, convertible, of course.
Yeah.
But for me to see that and to see if we were privy to the UFO and technology and the ship technology back then, And so what did you focus on in particular in that?
Well, yeah, first of all, there are bases. There were secret bases, at least in Antarctica and during World War II. What happened was the Germans went down before World War II. They went down to Queen Maud Land, the part of Antarctica that's opposite South Africa, really. And that was a Norwegian area. And they then claimed it for the Third Reich, and they named it New Schwabenland. And it actually became a colony of the Third Reich. It had its own flag and things like that. We think that Rudolf Hess also was part of this expedition. This was all before World War II.
1930s.
So in the 1930s, about 1938 was when this happened. Also at that time, the Germans sent some expeditions to Tibet as well. And so what it appears to have happened is that the Germans, once they got to Antarctica, they didn't leave, and they continued. They built a submarine base there.
Well, let's go back to Tibet real quick. Is it true that the Tibetan monks showed the Nazi party an alternative entrance through their mountains that may be connected to where you're talking about, or am I just listening to too much?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's like the legends of Shambhala or Agartha. You have this underground world in Tibet and Mongolia and stuff, and Tibetan monks.
Hollow Earth theory.
Yeah, well, it's like a secret ancient kingdom, and that gets back into Vimanas and things like that. And the Germans were interested in Vimanas, and they were very much interested in Tibetan lore and legend and knowledge and whatnot. And so it would appear that, the Germans did glean some knowledge from Tibet and the Sanskrit writings and things like that, and they were looking at that. I would say that, as far as some super duper tunnel that's going, vast thousands of miles through the earth, you have to wonder about that. There is an underground world, and the Germans did that too. I mean, that's what they would do. They would dig, it would hollow out mountains, just like we're doing today. A lot of our techniques of underground bases and tunnels and things like that, we really, picked that up from the Germans at the end of World War II, because that's what they had been doing. And they had created whole underground factories and things like that for aircraft and things of that nature. And so that's one of the things that happened, was that the Germans began creating what we call extraterritorial bases around the world. And they had no care at all about national boundaries or anything like that, or territories. They didn't care. And in fact, apparently, not only did the Germans set up secret bases in Antarctica, but they set up secret bases in Tibet, in Greenland. They set up a secret base in the Canadian Arctic. They set up other secret bases, we think, in other Arctic islands. They had a secret submarine base in the Canary Islands, and that's become well known. And I talk about all of that in this book. Even the thing of Hitler supposedly escaping to South America and stuff like that. What happened?
Do we have proof of Hitler in Argentina? Is it because the U-boat didn't make it to Antarctica when it was supposed to? Did he want some kind of tie to the real world still, to feel like he was a part of things?
Right. I write about that in this book, Honeyboo, The Secret Files. This is the second book in the series. The first book is Antarctica and the Secret Space Program. My second book is Honeyboo, The Secret Files.
The Honeyboo was the name, a lot of names of a lot of Nazi UFOs. The Honeyboo.
That's right. The Honeyboo was the larger of the Nazi UFOs.
Yes.
The Nazis created apparently three main UFOs.
Okay.
The main one was the Honeyboo, which is here, and that was a large flying saucer that held up to like 20 people in it. Then there was a smaller craft called a Vril craft.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and those were smaller, and those were like two-person craft or something. And I detail that the Vril craft in both the books, in all three of them really, and I talk about it in the Antarctica book too. So the Honeyboo was then, and then the third craft was the Andromeda craft, and that the Andromeda craft is the mothership. That's these big cigar-shaped craft. We actually have plans, the German plans for these craft. I mean, it's
blueprints.
Yeah, blueprints and stuff like that. I mean, it's amazing, and we have photos.
So if we have that, how come they're not being built, but in a mass scale by even like a Elon Musk or somebody who has a bunch of money who just gets their hands on this stuff and wants to see if they can do it?
Yeah, you would think that say Elon Musk or somebody would do that, and I'm pretty sure that Elon Musk is interested in all this stuff.
He's got to be privy to it. He's got to know about it.
Yeah. Well, back to Hitler and whatnot. Yeah, in this book, I do have a couple of chapters about what happened to Hitler, and what happened with Hitler was he and Eva Braun, and they had a daughter. They flew out at the end of the last days of the war. They flew out of either Berlin or the Third Reich itself had moved to another city north of Berlin, near to Denmark. The last few weeks of the war. That was the new capital of the Third Reich before it was destroyed. So what Hitler apparently did was they flew out of Germany and they flew north to Denmark. At the end of the war, Denmark and the very northern part of Germany were still controlled by the Germans, and even parts of Norway. So they flew up to an airport in Denmark, and then they flew to a different airport in a different plane back towards the west of Germany. So they were changing planes. And then finally they got on a plane, and that plane flew to Spain. Spain was where that was a neutral country that was pro-Germany and pro-Third Reich. And Spain was giving any Nazis, a safe haven if they wanted. So yeah, this plane then flew to Spain, where the daughter got off, and she then took apparently just a normal passenger ship to Argentina from Spain. But Hitler and Eva Braun, they then flew from Spain to Fuerteventura, the largest of the Canary Islands, and it's also it's the Canary Island that is closest to Africa too. So they flew there to a special airstrip that was at a German villa, and that airstrip and this villa on the very far east side of the island, it was all by itself. Today it's a national park in Canary Islands, but this villa literally had a staircase that went down inside cliffs down to a secret submarine base that was there and on the ocean, and it had 3 berths for U-boats. And I talk about all this in the book. People have been there. This secret U-boat base has been acknowledged now. And
what do they say it's for or from? Do they acknowledge it being connected to Hitler?
Yeah, they call it the Winter Palace. A German general lived there, and his name was Winter. And he owned this villa. And this villa had secret passages and stuff like that went down into this submarine base. Hitler and von Braun then got into a submarine there and then went to Argentina. And it's quite possible that they went to the New Schwabenland Antarctic base first. They may well have. But this is the thing with, and as I try to explain in all my books, because Antarctica and Argentina are very, important in all this. I mean, this was the thing, and, you get a lot of fantasy talk, I think, about Antarctica and, hollow earth and, vast underground bases and things like that.
Alien
but
presence.
In reality,
beaming battleships
all kinds of, stories and even pyramids encrusted with ice and stuff like that. And, those stories are intriguing, to say the least. I would say that, trying to figure out fact from fiction is not so easy.
Right.
And, people, a lot of times people, the more far out and amazing something is, the more they want to believe it, I guess.
Do you believe there's still a presence left over from that in Antarctica now?
Well, there would be, but here's the thing, is that ultimately the Third Reich, as it dissolved, and they basically lost their home country, Germany, and all the territory it had pretty much controlled. What happened then was, what was left of the Third Reich, and a lot of these guys were SS officers and things, they basically moved to South America, and Argentina was the main country to go to. And that's part of the thing too, is that, in Antarctica, you can't have ranches, you can't have farms, you can't have restaurants and factories and stuff like that. I mean, you can have a military base that's secret, and it can have a factory and a machine shop and stuff like that in it. And these secret submarine bases would have all that. I mean, they could actually make parts and things like that for the submarines. And, they would do all that. But yeah, I mean, so if you want to have a real economy and food and all that, you need that. You need farms, you need ranches, you need all this stuff. And that's in South America. So yeah, those farms, those ranches, those factories, they were in Argentina mainly, but they were also in Chile. They were also in Paraguay, Uruguay to some extent. But yeah, the three main countries that were very pro-Nazi, even, for decades after the war, were Argentina and Chile and Paraguay. Paraguay itself is a landlocked country, but it was famous for being, pro-Hitler, pro-Nazi. I mean, right up into the 70s and 80s. So what, at that time you had what was going on in Argentina at that time was pretty amazing. You had these Nazis who are now in bases in Antarctica, also in Greenland, also in Canadian Arctic, and they still had this base, this semi-active submarine base in the Canary Islands. Apparently they had also some kind of a base in the Western Sahara, which is near to the Canary Islands. That's a country that doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
But it was called the Spanish Sahara. Morocco basically took that over in the 70s. But it was this weird Spanish enclave in North Africa where the Nazis would hang out and stuff like that. So all of these Nazis. Oh, and then Juan Perón himself, he was pro-Nazi. He hired Otto Skorzeny, the famous Nazi SS officer who rescued Mussolini at one point. I mean, this guy was a commando. He was decorated. So he was down there in Argentina, and allegedly Juan Perón had 10,000 passports, Argentine passports for Germans, and he would just pass them out. With Hitler and Eva Braun, they eventually moved, and this is well known in Argentina, to a mountain area called Bariloche. It's a ski area. It's in the Andes. It's near the border of Chile. It's very much like Switzerland or something. I mean, it's alpine lakes, ski areas, beautiful mountains, big forests, and evergreen forests and stuff like that. And Hitler there lived basically on an island in one of the lakes, and it was owned by this German, wealthy industrialist, and that's where Hitler lived.
So
supposedly Eva von Braun left him, but they say that he died around 1960 or so.
So that's, in order for that to happen, wouldn't the Allies almost have to look the other way on purpose and know that they didn't get him? The understanding was they get shut down, but he gets to go free. And then we get the lie from Truman, which is Hitler's dead.
Well, right. And, people at the time of Hitler's death or supposed death, a lot of people doubted it.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, even the Russians and everybody, they all kind of doubted it. It's been proven now that one of the things that they've said, that the Russians said, was Hitler's teeth and stuff like that, it wasn't. No. I mean, they've proven that this one artifact they had that supposedly was Hitler, it just wasn't him. So, I think the Americans knew, and probably the Russians too, but particularly the Americans, they realized that the Germans had kind of, in many ways, relocated to South America. And they were looking at all that, but there wasn't much they could do about it. They would send FBI agents and CIA agents down there to snoop around and stuff.
Really?
But they would probably be killed, or they, would find a dead end or something like that. There's a documentary that appeared just a few years ago called Grey Wolf, and Grey Wolf was Hitler's code name.
Okay.
And and that book talks about all the things I'm talking about. And Hitler, going up to Denmark and flying to Spain and then to the Canary Islands and taking a U-boat to Argentina. That book does not talk about flying saucers or anything like that, but it does talk about these secret U-boat bases and the secret base in Canary Islands, and Hitler, going to Argentina. But at the end of that documentary, there's people who were alive in the 50s who had seen Eva Braun and Hitler,
wow,
at certain places in Argentina, just late 40s, early 50s. And one of those people then got a phone call, they say, a mysterious phone call, warning them not to be talking to these documentary makers and stuff like that. And and it was a woman they were talking to, and they told her the SS is still operating in Argentina.
Oh,
and this was like 2014 or so. So they were saying, we're still here. We're still here in Argentina. What a lot of people don't realize too was that the military intelligence of Germany during the war was called the Abwehr.
okay.
And it was commanded by an admiral his name was Wilhelm Canaris. So he was the head of the military intelligence in Germany, even during the war. But at the end of the war, Canaris got caught up in one of these conspiracies to get rid of Hitler, and they found out about it. So Hitler himself fired Canaris. He was the head of military intelligence, and he was arrested. And then Hitler dissolved the Abwehr, and Canaris was executed just prior to Berlin falling to the Russians. But what people don't realize was that with the dissolution of the Abwehr,
Mm-hmm.
that meant that the SS now took control of all of military intelligence in Germany, and they were running the whole show. The SS was. And so the SS had control of all of these secret weapons, the flying saucers. They had hundreds of submarines that they call black submarines that just disappeared. They were in control of these bases in Greenland and in the Canadian Arctic and in Antarctica and whatever was going on in South America. The SS was in control. But another thing happened there too, was that also at the end of the war, Himmler tried to, who was the head of the SS, he tried to negotiate a separate peace agreement with the British and the Americans.
Uh-huh.
And Hitler wasn't having that. See, part of the things with the SS and the Nazis in general, their big fight was against Russia. It wasn't against really France or England or America. It was against Russia. And what Himmler wanted to do was he tried to get a separate peace agreement with Churchill and the Americans and whatnot to have to stop the war on the Western Front so that the Germans could keep fighting on the Eastern Front with Russia. But the British and the Americans refused that. And then Hitler found out that Himmler had been doing this through Swedish intermediaries. And at that point, he fired Himmler. And Himmler was also became a convict in a sense. And he had to escape himself.
Wow.
And the Third Reich, disowned him. So now the SS didn't have its leader anymore. It has been speculated that Himmler somehow escaped and survived World War II, but but apparently, the other evidence is that he was killed, and that's the British claim that they captured him, and then he died. Allegedly, Himmler died in British captivity, biting a cyanide capsule that was in a hidden tooth.
Yes.
Like that, and he killed himself. So at that point, I mean, if that's the case, Himmler was now dead. So you have all of these SS officers, and they're running around. I mean, they're all having to escape Germany. They're although some probably even remained in Germany, hiding, mainly in West Germany. But
so we agree on that Hitler was not killed in the war, that he lived out the rest of his life, and was in retirement, like you said, on a ranch, not
on a ranch in Argentina. Yeah, and that's well known in Argentina. I mean, there's been numerous books about it, and around that town, Bariloche, which is a major tourist town, really. Yeah, it was well known that Hitler had lived there. And again, what I'm saying is that the SS was protecting them. The SS is still operating, and even one of the things that happened right after World War II was tremendous German investment in Argentina, particularly, where BMW and Mercedes and all these German corporations moved into Argentina in a big way. And they set up aircraft factories and automobile factories and other things like that in Argentina. And a city in northern Argentina called Cordoba became essentially the Detroit of Argentina. And it turned Argentina into South America's, industrial powerhouse for a while.
Right. So the proof is there. The post
and there was
of them
huge influx of Germans there.
Yeah. So the proof is there that there was actually the connection.
Right. And now, I mean, so the bizarre thing here then is that you get flying saucers, and these craft are involved in it too. And let me tell you, in Argentina and all over South America, it's a hotbed of UFO activity, and has been, since after World War II. And I can tell, I've spent a lot of time in South America, and I've been to all these places. Argentina, I've been to Bariloche. I actually know these places personally. Mm-hmm. And when you're in South America, the subject of UFOs, flying saucers particularly, is a normal conversation. Almost everyone believes in them. News, on the news, they don't ridicule UFO sightings. They put them on the news.
Right.
And when a UFO is seen around a big city like Buenos Aires or Lima, Peru, or anywhere, it gets in the news.
I know when
the video footage is put in there, and people, it's very much an accepted thing that UFOs exist down in South America.
When my mom was working for the National Enquirer, she made a friend called, his name was Bob Pratt, and he was the head UFOologist at the National Enquirer, and he spent a lot of time in Brazil, a lot of books down there. Is that someone you're familiar with?
I sort of know of him, that Bob Pratt. And
he's no longer with us now, but he was really into that area and kind of had a lot of the same views as you do, because there's so much connected to the area.
Well, yeah. And look, I mean, the thing is, too, that this can't go unnoticed to, military intelligence, Navy intelligence, and all that. I mean, and they worked actually with Nazis after the war. And that's what's known as Project Paperclip.
Okay.
Where, yeah, all of these Nazis were brought to America. Scientists, Wernher von Braun, the head of NASA, was one of them. Mm-hmm. And these guys, you know, they had a good idea about what was going on and what had been going on.
And that's how we got to the moon.
Yeah, right. Well, and again, and then you have the moon conspiracies too, you know, like, well, did we go to the moon before we went to the moon? And I talk about that in the Secret Space Program book, Antarctic and the Secret Space Program, that, yeah.
David,
the U.S. Army and military, they had plans to go to the moon by mid-60s.
Do you think the moon is artificial, or do you think the moon is something that nature itself coagulated together and made this satellite that is perfectly the dimension we need and perfect distance from the sun to us? And is it hollow? I know a lot of astronauts who visited the moon had a lot of alien sightings. And pretty much everybody said they were being observed in some form or fashion.
At one point, NASA said, although apparently they've somehow changed their mind, I guess, but back in the 70s and early 80s, NASA was saying that the moon was older than the Earth and that it wasn't really from our solar system. And when you look at the idea that the moon is hollow, and it rings like a bell, there are craters on the moon, supposedly, where they can't find a bottom, that are going inside this, what could be a hollow moon. One of the books that was written in the 70s about the moon was called Our Mysterious Spaceship Moon. And that was a book, it didn't have any photos in it, but it was all about how the moon is, some kind of hollow spaceship that has been put into an artificial orbit around our planet. And in theory, there's people inside the moon or bases inside the moon. And just like what you were saying yourself, the moon, our moon is in a very unusual orbit. Other planets, their moons they don't have any moon even remotely like our moon. Our moon is, it rotates in such a way as to always keep the dark side away from us. Right. Which is kind of unusual itself. I mean, that's a special rotation. But also that the moon, and you were alluding to this to yourself, the moon is in such an orbit and a distance from our planet that when you have a solar eclipse, the disk of the moon is transiting the disk of the sun. And that's you have to be at a certain spot on the Earth to see that when it happens. But when it happens, the disk of the moon perfectly covers the sun, not more and not less. Right. Like if the moon was closer to the Earth, it would more than cover the disk of the sun. If the moon was a little bit farther from the Earth, it would less than, cover the sun during an eclipse. But our moon is in such a position that it perfectly eclipses the sun. And for it to be randomly in that position is, the odds are astronomical against that. So that, there's I think many people, including people in NASA, they think that the moon is artificial. It's old. You have to wonder what NASA was doing on the moon, whether we've been back, whether we have secret permanent bases on the moon.
The fact that they don't tell us anything since the 60s makes me think that there's so much to hide.
It's pretty unusual that, they destroyed all of the Saturn V rockets that they were using to launch to the moon. Then all we had was the space shuttle, which couldn't go to the moon. And then they took the space shuttle out of commission. And now, how about this? I mean, the only way, well, now we have Elon Musk's SpaceX kind of stuff. But for decades, the American NASA or whatever would have, if they wanted to go into space, they had to go on a Russian rocket. I mean, we had to use the Russians to get to this, the International Space Station and stuff like that. So, all that, you have to wonder exactly what's really going on. We have been and during the Cold War, we would still, we still had this International Space Station. So even while Russia was our enemy, supposedly, we were building a space station in space with them. So that's one of the things with the Cold War and this, that Russia's our enemy. It doesn't seem that Russia has ever really been our enemy and even now, the way they put it, in the news, that you cannot have an arms race by yourself. You cannot have a race to the moon by yourself. You have to have an enemy, in a sense, an adversary to arm against and have an arms race with. You have to have an adversary to have a race to the moon with.
Well, now, David,
that's where Russia came in.
That gets to one of my points that I think about Kennedy. Kennedy inquiring to the CIA to disclose to Russia and maybe get on the same page with Russia. And Nick and I were talking about the Byrne document and how he wrote this letter to the CIA asking for disclosure and saying that he was going to go to Russia and say it's not us, it's a third party. We need to unite on this and see what's happening. And 10 days later, the man was killed in Dallas. So, do you think that that's a legitimate kind of assumption?
It may be. I think that the secret space program might have been one of the reasons why Kennedy was killed, and even he. Just prior to his assassination, too, he was at a NASA special meeting where they had a big argument, and Lyndon Johnson was there too, and von Braun, and they had a big argument, and it was about going to the moon and how they were going to go to the moon. And it may well be that von Braun and these guys were all saying, "Yeah, we got to shoot these rockets at the moon," but I mean, we just don't know. But maybe Kennedy himself was aware of some of these other technologies.
Sure.
And wanted, he was like, well, why don't we take a flying saucer to the moon, instead of that kind of thing. I mean, I personally feel, as far as the Kennedy assassination goes, I mean, it's quite complicated. And as a publisher, we published a bunch of books on the subject. Mm-hmm. But it seems that Lyndon Johnson himself was somehow involved in the assassination. And I mean, and that is very disturbing. And I think that's in my mind, that's the main reason why our government will not disclose, what they know about Kennedy's assassination. Let's say the CIA. Yeah, because it would implicate LBJ, and that is something they can't have. I mean, that one of our presidents was involved in the murder of, his predecessor. Mm-hmm. That can't be American history. I mean, all kinds of other people can have killed Kennedy and had reasons for it, the mafia or Cuba or even the CIA or even the FBI. Mm-hmm. But that Lyndon Johnson was somehow involved, that is something that they can never tell the American public. Personally, and there's a number of books about that very thing. That
he's
Lyndon
personally
Johnson,
involved and did personal things to.
He was personally involved, yeah, and that's why it happened in Dallas. And with the Dallas police, we're also able to cover up, so much of it. After Kennedy's assassination, at least 20 people were murdered in Dallas, following it because they knew too much about it. And it includes strippers and people who worked at, the guy who shot Oswald. Mm-hmm. He ran a strip club and all that. And then, he died in jail too. But, why he had shot Oswald, there's just so much, that's unanswered, really.
Amazing. That is just, because that's something I've always thought that was just too coincidental for, the timing of the Byrne letter to come out. And then 10 days later, he's just really killed.
Well, and, and it's interesting to think that.
President.
Yeah, well, and that flying saucers and secret technology and things like that are somehow involved in it as well. Well, Bryan, it's been great talking to you.
It's been amazing.
It's really been fun.
It's been so great.
So let's get together again sometime.
Let's do it. I can't wait to tap into your expertise again and get you on, and hopefully we can meet someday, maybe do like a little panel thing if I ever become big enough. Sure. Someday, David, you and I are going to be on a stage.
All right, well,
together.
Maybe out in Illinois, when I'm in Illinois, May or something.
When I'm in Kankakee, my hometown.
All right, thanks again.
Man. Great job, man. Thank you, I appreciate it.
All right, bye.
You can find us on Apple Podcast, iHeart, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find all of our social media. On Twitter, it's Bryan_Datillo. And on Linktree, that address is @Conspiracies Inc. Podcast. Thank you for joining us.